Yeah, a huge warm welcome to everyone to this conference on reinventing Chinese learning, a Westerner's perspective. Thank you very much for your time, for joining us this morning. It's great to have a group of you to discuss this topic with us. I'd just like to give a very warm welcome to our speakers today. So to Richard, Sam, and Lucy, who will be sharing later. Before we get into the talk, there's just a bit of housekeeping for you. You notice I was speaking in English. At least one of the participants on the call doesn't speak Chinese. It's also great for me, so save my blushes when you see how poor my Chinese is. But we'll, if we can, conduct most of this talk in English, if we can. If you need to express yourself in Chinese, I'm sure there are people whose Chinese is better than mine who can translate for us. So if you can, keep your microphone on mute unless you're sharing. We're really wanting this conference to involve everyone here, so you can have lots of opportunities to share your views and what you think. And we think the best way of doing that is after someone's shared, we're going to give like 5 minutes where you can use the chat function to respond to what people have said. So we get lots of people actually able to share their views. We can then read through that, and then we can go back to a discussion where you can actually share verbally what you've read and what you think. And ideally, if we can have a thread of conversation going, so once someone's shared something, we can then get someone responding to what they've said, would be brilliant. So we use that raise hand function that I'm sure most of you are familiar with to facilitate that discussion. In terms of timings, so we've got a sort of hard stop at 11. So we'll be wrapping up by then, if that helps you plan your morning. Just to make you aware that we're recording this discussions, just so we can share it more broadly as well. Just be that recording has already started. Hope that is fine. And also just to mention, it's great to disagree. So we're a community of people coming on here, learning about how to help Chinese learning move forward. We're sharing our ideas. Some of it may be evidence-based, research-based. Some of it may just be our own experience in the classroom. And all of our views are valid. Please feel free to disagree. I'm training to be a primary school teacher at the moment, and they have a phrase where they tell the children they have to put their hand up and they have to say, I respectfully disagree with because and that's great. You know, it's really lovely to have a forum where please feel totally confident to share your views. That's what we're really looking forward to doing. And actually, I'll mention this at the end of the conference, but we're also looking to do this again in about 6 months' time to really keep this dialogue going. Okay, great. So I will start speaking. So just very quick introduction to me. I studied Mandarin at university. I then, after a little bit of being a maths teacher, went on to being a Mandarin teacher. I taught at Brighton College in England on the South Coast for 8 years. My experience was mainly teaching secondary school students, but I also had experience of teaching down at the primary level as well. And after teaching at Brighton College, I then set up a dual language school in Singapore, so a primary school out there, and had experience of helping look at what dual language meant and how to make that as effective as possible. I now live in Scotland, training to be a primary school teacher, but also very much involved with this project at trying to make Chinese more accessible. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen now. When the purpose of my talk is really to share the landscape, to share our ambition of what we're trying to do, but also to talk about what the possibilities are, and then I'll hand over to Richard and Sam and Lucy to thrash out the details of actually how we go about fulfilling our objective. So just to begin with, this phrase, 我们的目标是什么? What is our objective? And I think oh, that's interesting because it's not actually moving forward. Just a second. So our ambition, I think, is really big. So if we change from our focus from teaching the people in our classroom to get a much more macro, big vision, it's really to change where we want Chinese to be, to 改变整个世界对汉语的普遍看法, to really redefine our whole purpose, our mission, our dream for Chinese. And that dream is to make Chinese an internationally used language, just like English is an internationally used language, to see it on a par with English. So really big ambition. How are we doing? What is the current landscape? So some figures for you to see where we want to get to, but where are we now? So you'll see that dates 2006. I started learning Chinese back in 1995 when there were no schools in England who were teaching Chinese. Moving on 10 years from that point to 2006, that was the year when Brighton College made Mandarin compulsory for all students in their secondary school to study Mandarin. A really pioneering act, very exciting for the study of Mandarin in this country. And then the following year, in 2007, they also made it compulsory for their primary school students to learn Mandarin. So this is when, about that time, Mandarin was starting to, people were noticing it, thinking, yep, this is something we can teach at secondary school level, at primary school level, and that momentum started building. If we then move forward to the present day, so we have that percentage, 21.9%, that represents how many secondary schools in England have Mandarin as an option at Key Stage 3. So Key Stage 3 is when you first join English secondary school, so between years 7 and year 9. And that, if you step back, you think, well, that's pretty good. That's 1 in 5 schools now offering Mandarin as a language. So it's come a long way from when I was at secondary school. If we look at about a bit of history, though, behind that, if you go back to 2016, that was at 20%, just over 20%. So actually, it's been pretty static for a good number of years now. So that sort of 20% mark. So although it's a good number, it has sort of flatlined over the last 6-7 years. If we now look at the state sector, so if that's 6.3%, that's how many state schools offer Mandarin at secondary school at Key Stage 3. Lot lower figure. And that has been growing, but only slightly. So in 2016, again, that was 2.6%. So some growth, but very small growth. So that sort of landscape of secondary schools is, quite a static landscape. If we now look at university, how many students are choosing to study Chinese at university, then that's actually quite a surprising figure. So there was an article in August of this year in The Economist, why fewer university students are studying Mandarin. And it's actually, I was really surprised by this. So this 31% that you can see there, that is the reduction in people studying Chinese as a single honors degree over the last 10 years at British universities. So down by 31%. In the last 5 years, from 2016 to 2021, in the US, it's also dropped by 21%. And in New Zealand, from 2013 to 2022, it's dropped by 48%. So that's despite lots of support from governments, the initiatives the British government has put into learning Mandarin. The US has been strongly sort of encouraging and putting a finance into the Mandarin learning. And if you think about New Zealand with its very important trade links with China, you've got a landscape where the studying of Mandarin, rather than growing, is actually shrinking, and shrinking quite significantly as well. So maybe contrary to what you might expect. So this picture, you might recognize it. It's sort of a picture that I've actually climbed this mountain about 5 times, and I wouldn't recognize it because the way I go up is this big, lovely, gentle path the other side. But this is Ben Nevis in Scotland. The Chinese, so hopefully get this right, Peng Ni Wei Shan. And the reason why I've got a picture of Ben Nevis up here is because for me, this captures what we're trying to do. We're trying to make Mandarin into a language that is challenging. Yes, it is, but it's an achievable challenge. So Ben Nevis, contrary to what you might look from the picture, is a mountain. You children can go up there. So my young children have been up there. Elderly people can get up there. It is a mountain that's accessible to virtually everyone. Yes, you're exhausted after it, and it's a tough climb, but you can get there. Vast majority of the population can get to the top of Ben Nevis, and that's what we're trying to do with Mandarin learning. And before we sort of go on to what's difficult about Mandarin, I thought it might be useful just to remind ourselves, from a Westerner's point of view at least, of what is fantastically good about Mandarin. So as a Western learner, for example, the word order of Chinese is really makes a lot of sense to us. It's beautifully logical. It's very similar to the way we think in English. The grammar is beautifully simple. If you compare that with the Westerners' learning of French and German, so there's this whole concept of conjugating verbs, where verbs change depending on who's doing the verb, the subject. It changes because of the tense. You get verbs that are regular and regular. You also get word order in German is very confusing for me, with verbs going to the end of the sentence. Lots of languages even have the gender for nouns. So if you learn the word for a table, you have to learn if that's masculine or feminine. So other languages have things that are incredibly complex about them. And I think sometimes we forget how beautiful the language of Chinese is. I mean, it's certainly captivated me forever since I started, and that sort of has never sort of diminished. It's still something that I find incredibly beautiful to engage with, and very enjoyable thing. And when I'm sure your experience when you're teaching, when people start teaching French at secondary school, a lot of the kids come in with their heads down. When you introduce Mandarin, you can see their eyes glittering with sort of interest as you introduce them to this amazing new world of characters. So has lots going for it. So hold on to that vision of Ben Nevis. We'll come back to that right at the end. But that's what we're trying to get to. This is maybe a more familiar mountain. So again, excuse the pronunciation, Zhu Mu Lang Ma Feng, Mount Everest. This is sort of how it feels, the reality of learning Mandarin. It is, some people get there, some people become beautifully fluent, but it's tough. It feels like an elite sport, and something that definitely isn't accessible to the vast majority of people. And so we're trying to think, why is that? Why is that the case? Why does it feel so difficult? So 问题是什么？问10个人，10个外国人，1个人说声调。一个人说发音，8个人说汉字。So when we look at what the problem is, this isn't scientific research, but I think it rings true. For most people, the problem they're saying is the problem with characters. And this lovely phrase that Richard introduced me to, cognitive overload. So my experience of teaching Chinese is that after get to sort of the end of year 1, they may start well with learning their numbers, but after a while, when you're asking them to learn a good body of Chinese characters, it just feels like their heads are blowing up, and it's just too much information. And just to reflect again on my experience of teaching at Brighton, so a school that really resources Chinese very well, lots of lessons every week. When we have a year group of about 200 at Brighton. When they select what they're going to do at Chinese, at GCSE, we lose 80%. So we have 40 children moving on to do it at GCSE. Of those 40, we then lose, on average, another 80% for A-level. So we get about 8 children doing A-level a year. And then in terms of university, we might get no children doing at university, or 1 or 2. But of those initial 200, in terms of then people going on to university, really, really small numbers, and also really small numbers for A-level as well. So that's what we're sort of our landscape. And I think that's a common landscape across across secondary schools. So that's sort of the issue we're trying to resolve. So our focus is very much on changing the perception and learning of characters. That's the key issue. And the key ambition is to make, instead of Chinese being a problem, to make it into this amazing world language, world script. Okay, so the purpose of this conference is how we do that. How do we change the attitudes to characters, the way it's learned? And that's going to be the main focus of this conference. And then just to leave you back with this picture of Ben Evers. So that's our objective. So we're going to be sharing ideas so we can make Chinese this accessible mountain. Challenging, yes, but an achievable challenge. Okay. That's hopefully useful just to set literally the landscape of what we're going to be doing together today. We'll go on to Richard in a few moments, but was there anything anyone wanted just to feedback on what I've just shared there? Any comments on that? Please put it in the chat or raise a hand. No problem if there isn't anything. Yes, I can see a hand there. Yes, Stuart. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Interesting introduction. In terms of landscape, I think there's a mismatch between what you're saying about the perceived difficulties of learning characters. There's two other aspects of landscape which I think are important. One is the general world view of China and of the worthwhileness of learning Chinese as a subject shows that China has gone way down in the ratings in the last 10 years. So the motivation for learning Chinese has subsided. And I think that's a key factor in undermining the learning of Chinese rather than a perceived difficulty of learning the characters. And then secondly, there's the narrower landscape of what are the alternative GCSEs on offer, including those of modern foreign languages. And I think there's a perception that learning Chinese is really difficult compared to learning French or Spanish or whatever. And that will impact both at an individual student's level, but also on the league tables for performance at GCSE or A-level for schools. And schools are afraid of anything that will undermine their results on those league tables. And having said that, I think that what I know of newbie Chinese as a way of learning Chinese characters is superb. But I don't think it's going to fix those other two aspects of landscape in and of itself.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Stuart. What I'd love to do now, if someone wants to respond to what Stuart's just said, if you could put your hand up, that'd be great. And then we can have feedback to what Stuart said. And then if anyone wants to make a separate point, I'll ask people to then raise hands. So if you could please raise your hand if you'd like to respond to Stuart's comment, if you have something to respond, that would be brilliant. Nothing. Can't see anyone's hand up. Just to say, yeah, from my perspective, I totally agree that the landscape is definitely more complex when you build in other factors, such as how desirable it is to learn the language of Mandarin in terms of its how useful it would be to the learners in terms of securing a job, and also that point on league tables, I think is very relevant as well. So thank you, Stuart. Okay, great. What we'd like to do now, I'd like to introduce Richard to present. Richard has also studied Mandarin at university. He went to live and work in Harbin. Over the last 10 years, he's been really focused on this whole concept of how you can make Chinese more successful, accessible. And he was very fortunate to enter into dialogue with an Australian academic called Jane Orton, and to understand her ideas about how to improve Chinese pedagogy. And we're really grateful for Richard to be able to share today. So over to you, Richard. Thank you.
大家好，Good morning, guys. 我也想说英语，因为我的汉语不太流利。So again, let's now based on the YouTube views on the video I put out last week, I'm going to presume most people have seen our video or my video and the kind of breakdown of pedagogy. So if you haven't seen that, you contact me afterwards. I'm more than happy to share it. But it will just save me time here. I don't have to kind of set up the scene, and I can dive right into to kind of what I want to talk about here. So guys, slideshow. Okay, and what I want to talk about is this fourth way. So I talked in the video about the kind of 4 different ways people can tackle Hanzi or Chinese characters. And my opinion was that this fourth way, being able to read the atomic structure of a Chinese character, has a glimmer of hope for the future of Chinese, for Hanzi as like this kind of international written language. Okay, so basically for the last 10 years, I've had one burning question, and that is, can people born outside of China read the visual building blocks of Chinese characters or the atomic structure? And the answer is largely no. Like there's nuance here, but it's largely no. And why is it so different than, okay, quickly, what's the shared visual structure here? Boom, there it is. So for any of you born in China or have high access to Chinese characters, you can spot this straight away, okay? For anyone born in China, from the age of 2, you were made very aware of this incredible visual structures all around you. Newspapers, kids' books, shops, menus, everything, everywhere. This is the written system of your country. And so from the age of 2, you've been staring at these visual structures everywhere. And so finally, by the age of 3 or 4 or 5, when you sit down to formally learn Chinese characters or Hanzi and write them, you're very, very aware there are visual structures, subunits or subcomponents of Chinese characters that are recyclable. Whether consciously or subconsciously, you know this, okay? So even though there are a whole pile of visual building blocks of Chinese characters or subunits that have no names, it really doesn't matter to you because you can still recycle them. You know how recyclable they are. So when it comes to a bunch of characters like this, you know what this structure is. When you're young, you may not even know how to say it or how to pronounce it or what it means, but you're still highly aware of its existence. Now, so you have, born in China, you're kind of on a train track way to learn Chinese. You've been staring at characters for years. You're fluent when you come to sit down and learn characters. And so when you look at characters, you're just applying a new sound. Okay, but you already know the context to use it in. Okay, whereas, okay, so these bits are recyclable. So essentially, you're doing a game that all kids love. Spot the difference. You have all the context, and every day, in every situation where you encounter Chinese characters, you've been playing a game of spot the difference since when you were a little child. Okay, now let's contrast that with the way Westerners first encounter Chinese. Generally, something like this. We have some characters, very limited source of characters. We have pinyin, we have these weird little tonal marks, and then we may or may not have a translation into English in there. So lots of visual content, but very, very little, very few characters you're exposed to. So for example, and I know this from experience with newbie Chinese, presenting it to Chinese teachers, if I was to suggest to Chinese teachers that they introduce this list or this lineup of characters to students, they would all say, no. We'll scare the students. We'll confuse them. Okay. So in this way, we're not able to play these games of spot the difference. We're not aware of these shared visual structures or subunits of Chinese characters that are everywhere. We don't know how recyclable they are. And we certainly don't formalize any kind of thing like this where we spot visual structures across the Chinese writing set. Okay, and it's from our limited exposure to Chinese characters. So we're being expected to learn in a very, very different way to people born in China. So, yeah. Now, so again, this is how we're exposed to Chinese characters. So, are Westerners able to spot these visual building blocks in Chinese characters? I think this has been answered really, really well in this book. This is the best book I've ever read on Chinese pedagogy, written by Jay Norton and Andrew Scrimgeour. Very, very pithy, gets to the grain immediately on all of the issues, all the various aspects of pedagogy, but it's also excellent when it comes to literacy in Chinese in characters. Okay. And they carried out studies. So this is in Australia, and Australia has a much higher social need on the requirement to learn Chinese. It's up there with all other modern foreign languages. In the UK, it's down quite a few pegs. In Australia, it's at the top of the kind of essential foreign language list because trade links and everything. Okay, they've put a lot of time into it. They've years of experience building out their pedagogy. So the authors carried out a study. This was in a primary school. After 6 years of learning Chinese in a primary school, students were asked to describe a Chinese character. Their answers were, a Chinese character is really bad because it has little marks like little lines. It's a bunch of lines, a whole lot of lines going everywhere to make a word. Very difficult to write because they have lots of fiddly parts. Chinese character uses strokes. Lots of lines started off looking like pictures, but over the years has changed. And so absolutely nowhere in here is there the concept of recyclable subunits or subcomponents or visual building blocks. Nowhere. So this is after 6 years. These kids have kind of wasted 6 years if they want to get a leg up on becoming literate in Chinese characters. Now, you might say to yourself, okay, these are primary school children. Once they become more cognitively aware or able, they'll start seeing structures. The answer is sadly not really. So this is the same book, another study. This is a second generation Chinese kid. So Chinese parents, but born in Australia, who had studied for 6 years in an intensive immersive Chinese program where math, science, and geography were all taught in Chinese. And the author, Andrew, sat down and wrote down these characters, 斜路, meaning slope or gradient, which is in math, science, and geography everywhere. The student didn't recognize them. They talked about the characters for a while, and then the author spoke them a couple of times. 斜路, started putting them into context, and then the student said, yes, now I recognize them. Then the author, so after all this time they've been looking at these characters, then the author covered over these characters and asked the student to write their version. And this is what the student wrote. So we can see that they have become, after 6 years in intensive immersive, plus all the primary school Chinese learning, they've become aware that there are visual structures or subunits, but they don't actually have any formal way of dealing with them. They can't do this. They can't look at a Chinese character and formalize a way to read visual building blocks across Chinese characters. Okay, now this is pretty serious coming from a second-gen Chinese kid in an intensive immersive program. So when we just get to barely touching Chinese in, say, the UK, it's a totally different story. Okay, now what's the solution here? Well, people might say, okay, you don't have you're not born in China, so let's talk about radicals and phonetics, and we'll use them as a guide to dealing with Chinese characters. From a study done in China, where at primary schools in China, they typically introduce about 2,500 characters. They did a study on phonetics and radicals. It was shown that radicals work about 58% of the time. Side phonetics work 39% of the time. And the problem is when you multiply those two probabilities together, you've only a 23% chance that a character has both a radical and a side phonetic. Okay, so basically this stuff. Everything in red, if you encountered a page, everything in red, either the majority or the entirety of the visual structure of the character makes no visual sense. Okay, now it gets much, much worse for Western learners because we don't have the deep kind of orthographic knowledge and exposure to Chinese with these rare characters like a jui that would make rhyming with to push, tui, or she, hu, or the guai, which rhymes with kwai and kwai zi. Okay, so this means without this knowledge, this gets even worse. So it becomes like here. So if a Westerner who deeply knowledge of radicals and phonetics encounters a page of text, they can make sense of this kind of percentage of the text using radicals and phonetics. So this system is really deeply broken. It's still useful. We can leverage that knowledge, but it's not going to work as a fundamental system. And so it's not made better by the fact that there are a whole bunch of visual building blocks that don't have names even in Chinese. Okay, what it means is that none of this is recyclable knowledge. And Western students come at Chinese and realize they have to rote learn every single character there is, essentially. That's kind of their subconscious belief system. They're aware there are thousands and thousands of them, and so Chinese is just impossible. So what's the solution here? Well, Westerners would really love to do something like this. It's a kind of like a spot the difference exercise, but it also fits in neatly into how we actually read English words using letters to pick apart a word, little visual building blocks, except these are little 2D puzzles, and we all love puzzles, okay? Every child loves these games. Spot the difference. My little 2-year-old last night in bed is just addicted to these puzzles. So if we could restructure Chinese, reinvent it for Westerners, have a Western pedagogy, then I think we could totally change this scenario completely. Okay. Now, this is the part of my talk where stuff is going to get really weird. If you were born in China, and if you have a classical Chinese if you came through a classical Chinese educational system, this is where things are going to get weird, but I think very legitimate, because culturally we're so massively different in education wise that we need something very, very different for Westerners. And if we want to invent something for Westerners, let's start from scratch and let's make it as efficient, as fast as possible. Okay, so it's going to look a little weird now. First off, we'd want to know exactly how many visual building blocks there are. Now, currently nobody knows. Guesstimates from academics are somewhere around 450, but nobody's entirely sure because there are lots of contradictory kind of visual structures. We want to know how many visual building blocks there are. We want to know how valuable they are across the Chinese writing system, and we want names for them. One-time names, not different names in different circumstances. So when it comes to a list like this, we'd now be playing a formalized game of spot the difference, which would get really, really interesting. You could spend a couple of minutes on this list if you had names for these visual building blocks and fly through them. Now, Chinesey was really interesting when it came out. It looks cool. It looks nice. It's attractive. It seduces people into Chinese. And you think, wow, it's beautiful, right? Very well designed. However, we don't want to do what they do. And that's, look at this guang, which has been used as an antler, the bone that comes out of the deer's head. Are they going to make all of the guangs and all of these other characters antlers in animals or a deer? And if not, then they're not recycling any of this knowledge. We can't do that. Similarly, the chuan, this claws and tusks from dog and monkey, there's no recycling of the knowledge here. Okay, so we need to have a name, a set name for one visual structure that stays the same across the entire writing system in Chinese. Okay, all of a sudden, if we did that, we would empower students to name visual building blocks within a character and know they're onto something. There are no contradictory things. They don't change depending on where they are in which character. Okay, they'd be standing on firm ground, a firm footing to kind of climb Ben Nevis here, to use the pulse analogy. We also can't do what Chinesey did, where all the color and emphasis is on the structure that you're not really interested in, because when you strip away the color, do you remember the black bones of the character? And the answer is largely no. So could you spot that from a lineup? Probably not. Certainly if you're not if you're not used to Chinese characters. Okay, so what we really need to do is build on the very bones of the characters themselves, okay? Where the very lines is the artwork, is the attraction, okay? Now, here's another thing that Chinesey have done, but isn't very efficient. So here's a very, very similar structure: 1, 2, 3, 4 lines, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines, and there's this little dash of a difference, yet they have 2 unique pieces of artwork. What if instead we built on the chassis of the original character? Now, all of a sudden, there's cognitive efficiency here. Once you're introduced to a hero, then you're just adding features to that hero. And so you can save mental space for memorizing the rest of the stuff, okay? What if we, and if we get creative here, we can really speed things up. Now, we'll deal with characters like this. Zhui, in a frequency analysis of Chinese characters, where the is number one, shi, I think, e is number two, shi is three, and so on. Zhui comes in at 5837, so it's nearly in the 6,000th most used Chinese character. So no one's really ever going to encounter it. It means small-tailed bird for anyone who doesn't know. Now we can include a little short-tailed bird in a micro story here, but what we can do is build on this chassis. Now, what this structure is, why it's so important, is because it's in 38 of the top 2,000 Chinese characters. Massively important. So if we can discount this from other Chinese characters, suddenly we'll make a really, really efficient system. What do we do with building blocks that have no names? We'll give them a cool name. Immediately accessible. All of a sudden, people can read this from Ginger, the character for Ginger, the character to cover something, Guy, okay? Or Jiang, or Mei, Mei go to Mei, okay? And so on. And all of a sudden, we're now empowering people to read visual building blocks. We save them. We can build elaborate visual family trees, all built on the chassis of a number of heroes, so we can have a universe. Okay, and so again, they're just different features of the same hero. Okay, and then we make it, and then we gamify it. Kids these days, they're not. I think a lot of ADHD stuff is kind of a little bit overblown. I think people these days have seen options and they've seen ways they would like to learn stuff. And I think it's human nature to want to learn rapidly, most efficiently, and in a fun way, in a kind of social envelope where it's fun. And that's the reason why you're doing something. I think if we gamify it, make it incredibly easy, we could be looking at, where do we stop? Do we get 1 million new learners of Chinese? Do we get 10 million? Is that possible? Is it at this point that it becomes this kind of globalized language? Okay, so now I'm just going to dip into the platform that we've been building, and stop sharing there, and I am going to take you through what we've been building. Screen share. Share sound. Okay, cool. Okay, so let's just dive into okay, so here's our
Wang. 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 I am your king. Kneel before your king.
Cool. You can hear the audio? Yeah, okay, cool. Okay, so we have a Wang. Cool. Now if we jump out, we also have a
Ooh. I own everything. Ooh. Zhu, owner or host.
Okay. We have this zhu, and then if we jump in with something like a zhui.
This is the hopper host. It's the host on a hopper. The hopper host. You'll always see it with ren on one leg.
Okay, now students can learn this immediately. Within a couple of minutes engaging with Chinese from zero, they can now engage with this. And now when we look at the usefulness of a zhui, so if we hover over, we see some digits here. Zhui is in 38 of the top 3,000 Chinese characters. So this quite complex visual structure is highly used across the Chinese writing set. Now, if we don't deal with it like this altogether, what we'll do is we'll meet it here, we'll meet it there, we'll meet it in Tui, and it'll take us a very, very long time to put all the dots together and realize all along we've been dealing with the same visual structure. However, if we introduce it in this manner, we can suddenly discount it.
Who? Who are you?
Who's that?
Okay, or
Push.
Don't push me.
okay. So all of a sudden, now people are just reading this hopper host. Okay, instead of trying to memorize an 8-line structure every single time. And we can do that right across the Chinese writing set. So all of a sudden, things get really, really interesting. Now, if we want to take, let's just look at an off the charts. Kids love animals. It's the first thing they learn in any language except Chinese, because most of the animals, the characters are so visually complex that you just hide them away because they're too complex. But if we were to tackle something like a ying, now most of you, you're not going to think about introducing this early on, but this is just an example.
Falcon. A falcon? The fastest animal on Earth. Fastest animal on Earth. Falcon.
Okay.
Ying.
Okay, cool. And if we go on and write that,
Ying.
we have our guang, which we have a blueprint for how we're going to animate, but we haven't animated the guang yet. Okay. Now all of a sudden people are really very much dealing with these visual structures, these repeat visual structures. They're not trying to memorize this insane piece of line art individually in isolation. They're actually dealing with this structure like this. So essentially this is the setup. So once you can there's gameplay. Now, when I typically deal with native Chinese teachers and I suggest we do something like this, they say, no, we'll confuse all our students. I think what they think is that we need to teach all the pronunciation and all the context in here and all that. And we're arguing no. This is a lineup game. This is a spot the difference game. And generally, kids, if you go through it, they will take between 3 and 4 minutes. 3 and 4 minutes to memorize an entire lineup like this. So you introduce the structure and you have 3 or 4 minutes, and they have a context for this visual building block, and they have semi-memorized most of these other characters. They won't know the pronunciation, but that's cool. We can deal with that later. So when we go on to things like the gameplay, they will then
maintain or preserve.
We create this social need where all of a sudden they have to compete against one another. They are
maintain or preserve.
There we go. We're forcing them into instances where they have to stare at Chinese characters.
Who?
There we go. Okay, get that chair out of the way. Okay, so and so on. So we can even go in and do things like apologies. When it comes to translation, we can skip the pinyin element of it, which is quite visually confusing, and we can start dealing immediately with Chinese characters.
Don't push me.
Now, at this stage, they may not know how to say push, tui, but it doesn't matter. They've spent 10, 12 minutes from zero Chinese to here, where they're actually seeing the context and seeing how Chinese works. Cool. Another context. Let's just look at whole to the whole. Okay. Now, again, most animals are off the beaten track because they're so visually complex. However, if we tackle them in a kind of systematic way,
or vector.
Arrow.
Arrow.
Okay, cool. Once we have this reference, it really isn't that far off.
Monkey.
Okay. Neither is doctor.
Doctor.
I need a doctor.
Or neither is
give me a moment. Did I come at the wrong time? Wait.
and so on. So we're effectively teaching them a new reading skill, dealing with these Chinese characters. And then they can see how to put them in context and decide when is the best time to pick up a full noun. We all know Chinese characters don't stand on their own, and so on. But we're empowering students here. Now, just to answer kind of Stuart's question in there, what I think I think if we can put this in students' hands themselves, like our first step is to deal with schools, but if we can put this in students' hands themselves, they can decide how to engage with this. I think the learning speeds will go way up, and all of a sudden, Chinese teachers will be dealing with semi-literate students after like a couple of 100 hours. If we can get people to 3,000-4,000 characters after a couple of 100 hours, I think that would completely change the paradigm for a language like Chinese, which is this kind of grammar light language. Yes. Okay. I think that's my talk.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Richard. That was great. What we're going to do now is actually give people a bit of time to respond to. There's lots in there. What I suggest is we're going to use the chat function so we can have lots of views expressed. We're going to spend about 5 minutes doing that. So if you need to jump to the loo, get a drink, but also I want to give you time to think about what you've just heard, put it in the chat. We can then read through the chat, and then from that chat, we can then have a discussion on what Richard shared. I think would be the best way forward, so we include as many people as possible. So maybe if we come back together at 9:55, so it's just 7 minutes. So a little break, but also time for you to jump on the chat function and express some opinions would be brilliant. Okay, so seeing you about 7 minutes. Great, thank you. Yeah, so please raise your hand if you'd like to respond to any of those comments.
I'd love to ask Tate Michelle, I think. Just your comment there. I think my worry about full focus on characters, which my students find easiest, is that's really interesting. Your students find the character learning easier than the speaking and listening? You're muted. Just be aware. Can see you, Tate. Ask to unmute. Just be aware, if you are replying, Tate, you are muted. Okay, she can't seem to get her mic to work. Okay, I'd be really interested to have a follow-up conversation with you on that. That's it's usually the opposite that we find, but I'd certainly like to listen to your experience. Thanks, Stuart. You're being very complimentary. It's nice to get it. Elliot, can I respond to Elliot? Oh, sorry, Stuart has his hand up. Sorry, guys.
No, go on, Richard. We'll go to Stuart after that. Yeah, if you've got it.
Elliot,
I'm happy to defer to Elliot. Yes.
Okay. Creating the hierarchy of character components is a lot of work. It may be worth doing this in an open source way in order to garner contributions and support from the widest possible audience. We thought about that, and we've looked at. I think it's Oondle. Lucy Wicks is going to talk about Oondle, I think, later. I've looked at a lot of stuff, but the problem is we then get conflicting. So you saw our Wang and our Zhu and our Zhui and so on, those visual building blocks that build up and share the chassis. Whereas we feel if it's done in an open source manner, you're not going to have a kind of over control of the narrative and the cast of heroes, if you will, and the design constraints. They'll be quite different. So, for example, etymology is a good one. When I'm studying Chinese and I see a character I don't know, often I jump into etymology to see what it's all about. And it's not that I'm looking for a real history or a false history. I don't even care. I'm just looking for a micro story to make sense of the visual components. And we all know most etymology isn't really known when it comes to Chinese characters anyway. But then there are conflicting stories on this, and it starts filling in my head with all these quite conflicting stories. And so there isn't a kind of a one universe. There's like a multi-universe, multi-reality for Chinese characters then. So the open source is an interesting idea. I think if we found a way we could do that, we'd definitely do it. Because obviously you can open up to massive resources then. But I think it'd be tricky. I think we'd almost need a solid core design for a platform like that, and then perhaps open up contributions from the outside. But it's certainly something we've been interested in looking at.
Thank you, Richard. Does anyone want to respond on that thread? What what Richard just responded to? No hands. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, go back to you, Stuart. Thank you, sir.
All right. Where do I start? There's a lot to agree with, and I think the gamification is an excellent way forward, and I think this way of learning characters is an advance on anything else I've seen. You were just talked about etymology. Outlier Chinese does try to come up with mini stories based partly on etymology, which help in the learning of characters. But I think your route is more powerful. But it is separating out the recognition of characters in reading from maybe from the writing of characters, but also from the pronunciation and understanding of the meaning of characters. So I don't know if you know the approach by Mandarin Blueprint, which I think you should have a look at. I'm just struggling to see how it would fit together with your approach. Maybe they're complementary rather than oppositional. But they come up with the idea of having a micro story of a character in the form of creating your own mini movies as a mnemonic. So it's combining together the pronunciation of the character, the tone that the character will be, as well as how to write and memorize the characters. I think your approach is going separate, and it's enabling students to make very rapid and motivated progress in terms of recognizing the characters. So it's not a contradiction, but I'm wondering if you're not sure whether there's 400 atoms or not. It seems to me to indicate that you haven't worked out the complete packages yet. And what you've got for these initial components is fascinating, it's wonderful. But how much more work is there to be done? I suppose this overlaps with Elliot's question. How much more do you need to do? And in terms of marketing what you're doing, I suppose if it's open source, that's difficult because you're not in control of the product so much. But are you marketing it at primary schools, or in terms of a wider reach? I'm conscious of the fact that Rishi Sunak and others are very concerned about the place that Confucian institutes have in universities in promoting Chinese in this country, and would like them to leave the scene, as it were. I think there's an opportunity to get in at a university level, maybe with those universities running courses on the learning of Mandarin as a separate activity, not as a degree in its own right. And to what extent is the gamification, are you looking to make it available to individuals rather than classrooms of primary students? I'd love to have something that I could use to make my character recognition better than it is at the moment. Sorry, that's a bit of a jumble of issues there.
No, I think I have you if I jump in now. So in terms of the R&D, research and development, even academics, like say Andrew Scrimgeour, who co-wrote that book with Jane Orton, he doesn't know how many visual building blocks there are. Nobody knows how many atoms of Chinese characters there are, really, because there are contradictory design bits. Okay, so if we look at kuzi, like trousers, the ku on the left-hand side, that comes from a shi to show, but visually they're extraordinarily different. Whereas some people would class them as the same visual building block, we would say it's a totally different visual structure. We're dealing with a language that stresses exactness in writing, the difference of an owner versus the difference of a king, etc. And so there's still quite a bit of R&D to do around the blueprint of further development. I think we've tackled most of the major ones, and then there's quite a few that are lesser and not preponderant in the Chinese writing set. But no, for sure, we really need resources and a team. We need to team up and drive it from here. So who are we marketing it to and the gamification? What we've tried this with 5-year-olds, and they've absolutely loved it. After the conference in London, I was staying with a family in London, and I was trying to explain what I did to them, what I did for a job, and I gave the 5-year-old my laptop, and she just played it herself for about 40 minutes, and then went away and then came back and played more. And by the end of it, she had about 25 characters, and nouns like Mao Toying, like owl, and Mao Zi, all kinds of stuff, Hou Zi. Which was fascinating to watch a 5-year-old go through that. Similarly, we've done it up to like any kind of adult age range, and we've tried that. So where we're going with this will kind of be we are selling into schools at the moment in the UK, but I think the real power is students themselves. I think at the moment we can probably get like a 10x increase in the speed of character learning, which is good, which is really good, but it's not really where we need to get it to. I think when we put it into people's pockets and they can engage on their own level and go follow their kind of interests and drive through a great gaming world that's more fully fleshed out, I think we might get up to like 30x the current speed of Chinese character learning. Now, of course, nobody really knows how long it takes to learn a Chinese character on average at the moment, but our kind of guess, it's about an hour per character for long-term memory formation if you do rote learning where you're writing it by hand. So these figures are all they're all a little bit up in the air, but yeah, when we can put this in people's pockets as individuals, I think that's when it takes off, especially with the multiplayer functionality if they're either playing bots or their friends. So if it's a classroom product where it's in a classroom, it's been used in there, and then kids can also go home and go like and blitz through characters and come back in and show all their mates and compete and like have thousands of characters after 100 hours. Then that'll get really interesting. And then, sorry, there was one other question, I think. Was there?
Well, a couple of questions that you haven't fully answered. One is, how many of the atoms have you produced the game scenarios for? I think a lot of the research shows that if you get up to about recognizing 85% of characters, that's absolutely wonderful. It doesn't have to be all 400 or whatever number it is, but in terms of the number of the recognition of characters from the games that you're already providing scenarios for,
so we have about I think it's about 400 characters on the system at the moment. Yeah. 400 now. To double or triple that, it's just a matter of man hours. So we can probably put on about 20 a week, 10 a week if it's just myself. But if we can up that, we certainly have blueprints for a lot of the atoms, and then building it into the dynamic characters, the dynamic font as we kind of call it, that takes 2 or 3 hours per character. There's a little bit of creativity, some take longer, and there's a lot of revisions and edits as we get tighter and tighter kind of comedic micro stories. But certainly it's just a matter of man hours. If we had a team, we could have 3,000 characters in 24 months. So that would significantly change the landscape if we could have 3,000 characters on there. So I think I've been in conference mode the last couple of weeks. I've taken my eye off the ball, but I think it's about 400 characters we have at the moment. And in terms of the atoms, I don't exactly know because it's kind of in that process of development. But it's I think there's about 200 in blueprint, and then how many we've actually implemented, I can't answer that right now.
Yeah, I think I think you'd be interested in the Mandarin blueprint approach. One of the benefits of that is you're creating your own stories, and that's always more effective than taking somebody else's. But that's not to. I think the stories you've developed are engaging as they are. But there might be something you would learn from their approach. I'm not sure. The other thing that strikes me is that if you're developing packages, and I have some experience of working in a bilingual nursery school, Mandarin, Chinese, and English, bilingual context. I can see that the approach would work there, but whether it's there or in a primary school or indeed in a secondary school, I wonder whether you can develop the package deliberately to facilitate a flipped classroom or blended learning. Do you know what I mean by those terms?
I don't actually. I'm sorry.
It's where a lot of the learning, whether it's of languages or whatever, is done at home. A lot of the preparatory stuff, and what happens in the classroom is more confirmatory or practicing what's going on. So you're setting things up so that students explore, maybe if it's young students with the help of their parents, they're doing things not just in the classroom, but they're playing the games at home. It's built in as a homework activity. There's that sort of innovation taking place as well. So that if you're learning Chinese as a primary school child, it's not just those few hours per week that you're doing it in the classroom. It's extended beyond that. And it seems to me that your approach is motivating enough for students to want to continue on their own.
Yeah, indeed. That's been our experience with interacting with students for the past 5 years. I've been teaching, probably taught about 6,000 students in Ireland, from zero Chinese to 50, 60 characters over the course of just a couple of hours, and it's been our experience that quite a few, like a significant percentage of those, let's say 5% of those, would want to continue. Now, all these students are just random selection of society. They wouldn't have any interest in Chinese before we would sit down and do a workshop. So if we can capture like 5% of a general audience, and they're convinced they would use this outside of a classroom on their own, and then as we develop the multiplayer game suite and they're in a gaming world, yeah, I think we can capture them and suck them into this world where they blitz through. When you learn games, you onboard an awful lot of information that you wouldn't initially set out to onboard, and kids are just onboarding information, hundreds of characters, just to play games.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of potential there as well. I suppose there are issues on how you can sort of make it so that it can't be copied by somebody else or go in directions where you don't have control of the marketing of it. But I think it seems a great idea to me.
Lovely.
It would work it would work in a nursery school environment as well as at a university level as well, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Stuart and Richard. Does anyone else want to come in on that topic or another of the comments made in the chat? Okay, we can always come back to some of the topics that have been raised by Richard and Stuart and other sort of comments in the chat. But I think it'd be a good time to hand over to Sam at this point. So if I just introduce Sam from his bio. So Dr. Sam Redfern is a lecturer in computer science at the University of Galway in Ireland, as well as a video game developer whose games have been downloaded more than 7 million times across PC, smartphone, and console. For 20 plus years now, he has published academic papers and book chapters on virtual environments and game-based learning. As the Chief Technical Officer of Newbie Chinese, he brings together his love of teaching with his love of games. Brilliant. Over to you, Sam. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, everyone. This will be a little bit different. I'm not a languages person other than programming languages. It's actually been really interesting to hear all of your perspectives. An eye-opener to me. I've been working with Richard for a number of years trying to develop Newbie Chinese. So I've been the poor person in the back room having to implement his crazy notions. I'm not sharing my screen, am I? Desktop one. Share. Okay, can you see that? Can you see that?
Yeah. Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to talk just briefly about game-based learning, the kind of thinking behind it, quite separate from the Chinese aspect. And I'm going to apologize, but I'm going to correct everyone who's been saying gamification. Richard's used to me doing this. You'll see why. Gamification is a small component of game-based learning, actually. Most of what we've been talking about is game-based learning rather than gamification. Okay, why do I think game-based learning is so powerful and so fundamental to humans, to mammals, possibly to animals? It's because this is what young animals do. This is how they learn things, is they play. Like play and learning are just so intimately connected, I believe. And of course, looking at lion cubs, why are they doing this? It's because they are practicing something that's dangerous in a safe environment. And that's certainly one of the things that game-based learning is for. Probably not for language learning, but certainly game-based learning is used in all kinds of simulated environments, dangerous environments, like firefighters do game-based learning, for example, which will be more similar to these guys, these lion cubs. If you just indulge me for 30 seconds, this slide probably shouldn't be here, but when I was putting this together, I was mindful of a friend of mine who had a cat, this is quite a few years ago, who had kittens. And the kittens were being taught how to hunt, okay? This, of course, is instructor-led learning. So what the mother cat went stalking up the garden. The kittens went stalking up the garden behind her. The mother cat leapt onto the windowsill. Maybe it wasn't the windowsill. Leapt onto a low wall. The kittens leapt onto the low wall. The mother cat stalked forward. The kitten stalked forward. And then the mother cat leapt upon the cat bowl. This is how she was teaching hunting. Completely irrelevant. I apologize. But it's obligatory to have cats in your slides as well. Okay, so why game-based learning? Why are we talking about this thing? Right at the top, we have the lion cubs. It's simulating complex or expensive or dangerous things. Okay, maybe that's a little less relevant to language learning. Second point, really important, is about motivation. And when people tease this apart, they're talking about two different types of motivation. So there's intrinsic, which is the desire to improve on your own previous attempts. And there's also extrinsic, which is where how this is normally pitched is it's about outperforming other people. And that's certainly, I suppose, the way that we've seen these little snippets of newbie Chinese being pitched. Personally, I'm much more interested in the cooperative. Like as a game developer for many years, I see personally a lot more power in cooperative multiplayer, as we call it, where people are achieving something together and kind of scaffolding a solution together. You get some really powerful motivations that way to like not let down the team or to achieve something for the sake of your teammates. I guess to some extent that captures the preferences of different people as well. Some people are very competitive for itself and they want to beat everybody else, but that certainly isn't everyone. Yeah, here's the slide where I'm going to correct everyone. So when we say gamification, we're actually talking about quite a low-level thing, a simple thing of using game-like, kind of double quotes, game-like elements inserted into traditional activities. So people in all walks of life talk about gamification, and this is just things like badges and leaderboards and scores. Okay, you can use it completely away from games. However, in game-based learning, we're actually using a game. So if you're literally using a game and the learning comes through playing the game, that's what we call game-based learning. I believe the latter to be much more powerful in most cases. And certainly game-based learning can include gamification. Newbie Chinese has gamification, but it has a lot of things that are going well beyond gamification as well. Yeah, so one of the key things, this would have been about 2018, 2017, when I've been working with Richard, one of the key breakthroughs for me was these online tools like Kahoot. So in my university teaching, I use Kahoot. The students love it. I've competed in Kahoots as well, and it's so much fun, right? But what are these things? They're just quizzes. Why are they so effective, even though they're just quizzes? And it really breaks down to these 3 points. They are live, they're at the same time. They are co-located, they're at the same place, and they're social. so the multi-user. So if you bring these three things together, you can just bring a whole world of fun. Okay, even though these are just quizzes. And I would say, therefore, as educational tools, they're actually quite low level. They're just gamification, but they're competitive, they're lively, they're fun. And this kind of breakthrough, we were teasing out ideas of newbie Chinese at the time, is that this way of delivering content is really, really powerful. But at the same time, they're missing out on so much by not actually having games. This is the single best game ever written in history, according to my opinion. So Wii Party, I don't know if many of you have played on the Wii. So my kids now are age 20 and 22. So we got a Wii back in about 2006, 2007. We got Wii Party on it. We have played this game ever since as a family. So this is a bunch of what we'd call mini games, where everyone has their Wii controller and we're all just competing in these funny little activities, horse racing and jumping over these barrels, and incredibly fun. Okay, again, why is it incredibly fun? It's not because these are excellent games. It's because we're all together. We're all sitting on a couch together, same time, same place, social. So this is exactly the same concept as this, but it's flipping it on its head. Rather than doing gamification, it is actually a game. And of course, it's not learning. Incidentally, 3 of these are competitive, but the one on the top right is actually cooperative. So Wii Party has a bunch of kind of both angles. So there's a cooperative one where you're trying to stand in the right place as a group so that the pirate ship doesn't fall over. So yeah, Wii Party, best game ever. Okay, why is it that social game-based learning is so effective? So we're talking about socially supportive learning rather than learning in isolation. This is well known in education pedagogy to be a very powerful thing, is that a community of learners can all support each other. I would argue the second point is really important. Again, I'm not a languages person, but language is all about people. Language is all about communication. This would seem to me to make the kind of social application, the social practice, the same place, same time, social, just doubly important for language. And I'd also drop this point in about cooperative rather than competitive. So a lot of games and a lot of theory looks at human nature to compete. I think there's a big human nature to cooperate as well. And we've seen this again in newbie Chinese, the social pressure to not let the team down and the kind of camaraderie that comes together with working in a team. It's a more positive energy in a lot of cases, or at very least, it's an alternative way of looking at things, and it suits certain activities much better than competitive ones. Okay, so this kind of led to the thinking, what if we put all this stuff together? Okay, what if we put 30 students in a room? On a Wii, there's 4 people playing. Why not have 30 people playing? Okay, we can do this. We can have a computer at the front with the teacher, or with a big screen with the teacher's computer hooked up to it. We can have the students on their smartphones or their tablets just connecting over Wi-Fi. We can deliver joysticks or lists of characters or activities that change onto these devices as the gameplay goes. We can use the devices really as like smart joysticks, if you like. So big screen at the front, shared game environment. Everyone's in that same game environment. We can throw up different mini games, just like Wii Party, each of which is targeting different of the various strengths of game-based learning that I've been talking about. And then, yeah, smartphones are used to control the individual actions. What if we did this? Obviously, we have done this. This is what we're trying to do. This is newbie Chinese. So just a couple of really quick slides on how the different aspects of newbie Chinese kind of hit these things. We do have gamification, okay? We have, for example, running races, which is what you see at the top left. All this really means is that the students are doing non-game activities as such. They're doing like spot the difference type activities that Richard talks about. But the better they do it, the faster their character runs. So that really is an example of gamification, in that you're turning an activity that fundamentally is not a game. You're certainly ramping up its competitive nature and its fun. Hugely, in fact, otherwise Kahoot wouldn't be huge fun. Just by putting it into a competitive environment. Again, bottom right here, at the end of many of our activities, we have this rather comedic podium where there's this massive cheering shout sounds, and the audience are going wild. So of course the students like to be on the podium. That's gamification. Okay, it's nothing to do with the actual activity, but it's certainly a lovely piece of icing for them, which really motivates. I don't particularly like the screenshot. It's a bit out of date, but it's an example. It's an old example we've actually changed of one of the mini games where we have competitive game-based learning. So what happens here is the teacher's computer is shouting out Chinese characters, and each of the students has a Chinese character above their head. And when the correct character is being shouted out, you can attack that character. You can throw bombs at each other. We've actually removed this concept. We've moved forward from this. But the idea is that, of course, in order to do well at the game, you have to be able to recognize the Chinese character. So this is more of an example of actual embedded gameplay, including the Chinese. And it's inherently competitive, right? You're trying to kill each other. Not kill each other. You're trying to bounce each other off the screen with these bombs, I should say. This was actually our first mini game, which is still one of my favorites. I love this bit of footage. So this is about back in 2017, 2018. Yeah, I think it's 2018. So here's a classroom full of 15-year-old boys. Okay, this is the hardest possible audience that exists for creating a fun environment where they're actually willing to engage in learning. They're all shouting, they're all screaming. If you look at the end, they actually hug each other, right? These are 15-year-old boys. Why are they doing this? They're playing a game which I'm calling Pac-Man meets musical chairs. So there's 30 characters running around in a Pac-Man maze. And again, the teacher's computer is shouting out a Chinese letter. They have to, and each of them has a joystick on their phone, and they're controlling the characters running around trying to get the correct Chinese letter. There aren't enough of the correct Chinese letters, so the target letter obviously falls short. Whoever doesn't pick one up gets knocked out, and then we go through to the next round. So as I say, Pac-Man meets musical chairs, and you can see the fun going on here. My personal favorite, this is a cooperative one. So the idea here is there's a smaller group of students, maybe 5 students. One of the students sees a phrase. All of the other students see possible candidates for that phrase. The idea is the one who sees the phrase has to say it, and then the other ones have to pick the right one. They don't have time. They're not allowed to show each other their screens. This is forcing the person to speak, and it breaks down all of the kind of social awkwardness barriers for a number of reasons. One, there isn't time. Like if you don't want your team not to get caught by this bad guy in the mech suit, you have to be quick. But also just in the kind of atmosphere of fun, everyone loses their inhibitions. In the atmosphere of not letting the team down, people want to do it as well. So I've seen this one as being really, really powerful. And of course, for language learning, this is critical to kind of break down the awkwardness barriers. So that's just another of our mini games. And that's the end of my talk. Right. It's slightly out of date, but Richard and I actually published a chapter in a book it was early 2022. We actually wrote it in 2021. So it's kind of 2 years ago. A lot of the things we've both been talking about are in here. I know Richard in particular, his theory has moved forward a lot in the last 2 years. So I hope he doesn't mind me pointing you to here. So on our website, newbieschinese.com, you can actually download the PDF. We have permission for you to get this PDF without paying for the book for personal use. So it's there. It goes into quite a lot of the kind of academic and video game theory, I guess, behind all of the stuff that Richard and I have been talking about. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sam. As a teacher, some of the points you raised there, like the collective learning of, actually teaching Chinese characters how to recognize them and how to write them. All of the games I've used in my daughter's primary school. And yeah, that same sort of engagement and the joy you were seeing in those videos of whether it's collective or competitive, those features are just resonating so strongly with learners. It's very interesting, that point where it's game-based learning. So the games on Newbie are facilitating actual learning to take place. It's not just, as Sam was explaining, gamification and having league tables that are engaging the children. there are games on there that are developing and enhancing their knowledge. So some really important distinctions in there. So yeah, really great. Thank you very much, Sam. We're going to just have another break for 5 minutes. So we'll come back at 10:35. Same drill. If there are things you'd like to comment on Sam's talk there, please put them in the chat. I've been just looking through the chat, and some people just asking. We refer to earlier questions, which we'll do after the break. Thank you very much for flagging those. We definitely want, where we can, all questions that have been raised to be answered. So yeah, if we just have another quick break for 5 minutes, and then we'll come back together after that. So 10:35. See you then. Okay, thank you.
Hello there. I'm just going to share my screen. Is this going to work? I think it is. Hey, can you see my screen? Good. You can't see me anymore, I'm afraid, because my camera decided to stop working. But if you can see my screen, that is fine. So thank you. I'm just going to talk for about, I don't know, 5 minutes, maximum 10 anyway, about whether we should or shouldn't be testing students. And the particular test that I'm talking about is vocab testing. So it's related to some of the things that have come before, but it's very much from my practical view, because I am a classroom teacher 4 days of my working week. And then the other day of my working week, I'm a teacher trainer. So I've worked in 3 different schools teaching Chinese, but I also teach other languages. So the kind of challenges we face in Chinese actually sometimes aren't unique. Sometimes they're the same as in other languages. In terms of motivation can be poor, students not putting as much effort into their homework and things like that. So first of all, I would love to get some opinions. I'm going to paste something into the chat, which is this link. But if you also have a mobile phone, if you're able to, you can scan this QR code. Let me come back to my chat. Oh, I've lost the chat function. That's not very helpful. I seem to have lost the chat with my screen sharing.
You should be able to hit more at the bottom, I think.
I don't have more at the bottom, I'm afraid. Okay, oh, here it is. Here it is. It's gone to the top of my screen. Let me just paste this in. So I know time is fairly short, but it'd be really great if this was interactive. So onto that link is a Padlet, and you can just type anything. You can also, if you don't have access to that, you can type in the chat your ideas. So I'd love for us to come up with some pros and some cons of giving vocab tests to students. So just again, I'm not talking about end of unit tests. I'm not talking about listening tests, reading tests. I'm talking about vocab tests. So pros and cons. I'm going to stop talking for, thank you. Somebody's already commented. I'm going to stop talking and time you for 2 minutes. This may be glitchy on your thing. And I'm actually, now I'm going to, oh, we have some music. I'm going to go to the Padlet and see what's popping in. Sound all right? Sorry, I stopped that because it was rather loud and I think it's affecting my internet. So I'm going to try again without the music, and I'm going to try and go to this Padlet. Thank you for everyone that's commenting.
So anyone who doesn't know, you can swipe right or left at the top of the screen, and then you can fill in the bad things versus good things if you're doing it on PC.
Thank you very much. I've temporarily lost my screen. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Huh. So I've lost my screen, but keep commenting, please. I'm going to quickly check up on the Padlet. Thanks for everybody commenting.
So some people are commenting in the chat and some are commenting on Padlet. Just so
okay,
you know,
wicked. Thank you. Okay, I'm back. Okay, thank you. So in the chat, I can see that and show it at the same time as the PowerPoint. So yeah, so students wanting to pass the test being a motivating factor. That's what Michelle's talking about. Something earlier, Michelle recognizes, yeah, you do have to come back to it. It's just maybe a vocab test is, maybe that's a con. It's just a test of a short-term memory and not a long-term memory. But it can inform your planning. Michelle's, I get the feeling, Michelle, generally you're a fan perhaps, or maybe you're just seeing both sides. So yeah, formative or summative. Group quizzes, that's interesting, Stuart. I don't know what you mean by group quizzes. How would you organize that? Feel free to unmute yourself if you
I don't think Michelle can get her microphone working.
Okay, so no, that's Stuart's comment actually. Stuart talked about group quizzes.
Running like a pub quiz. Instead of you being on the line as an individual, you're with 2 or 3 others, and you're trying to, between you, come up with the results.
Very interesting.
Some of the social benefit that Sam was talking about for cooperative gameplay, that sort of thing. And it
definitely
takes anxiety away from it, I think, and leaves a degree of competitiveness, which might be of benefit as well.
Great. So you've got some competitive, but you've also taken away some competitiveness, because you could, in your groupings, you could make sure that there's some equality in there and some support in there. So I like that idea. Thank you. So I can see the Padlet, but if I try and click on the screen, I lose everything. So I'm just going to look at the Padlet on my phone instead. So apologies if you can't see what's on the Padlet. So some people mentioned on the Padlet, the vocab test can be demoralizing. And I totally agree. This, for me, in recent years, students doing poorly on vocab tests has been the biggest reason why students have dropped Mandarin, which I know was one of Richard's kind of frustrations and why he wanted to organize this conference. What can we do about kind of recruiting and retaining those students? And it's because really that it dents their confidence. It's got a lot to do with their competence, their perceived competence. So I'm going to move on from that. Just get rid of the chat. So my background, basically, apart from teaching and wanting to retain the students, I've also been researching recently motivation. So in my research of motivation, I'm using a lens called the self-determination theory of motivation, which says that one of the things that this theory states, apologies if you've heard about this before, is students need to have autonomy, competence, and relatedness in order to be motivated. So particularly where vocab testing falls down sometimes is that it can dent students' perceived competence. So on this slide, these are some of the reasons why teachers might do vocab tests. And I kind of think these are all myths. So I don't believe teachers need loads of marks in order to help them, complete student reports or prove to anybody in your school that your students are making progress. I think realistically, we use other aspects. Some of them don't have numbers. We use our perception of students every single day and their contributions to class. So I'm not a big fan of collecting loads of evidence like that. Michelle thought students would be motivated in order to pass a test. I have found the opposite, actually, Michelle. I have to say, for some students, they are motivated when they know it's a test. For some students, when they've done a test previously and they've not done very well, it has this negative effect of what they will do at home. So I've actually found the opposite. I found that students, I don't think that they do spend longer if it's a test, especially in the past if their test scores have been low. So it's also not true, certainly in my context, which is at the moment is all girls school, that students all like competition and prizes. I've also been reading a lot of evidence about rewards and how detrimental to motivation they can be, particularly if they are expected rewards. Richard's surprised by that. There's a lot. I won't go into it, but there's a lot. You can contact me if you want to know some links. So if it is contingent reward, so if you get this on your test, then I will reward you with this. If it's contingent, as opposed to unexpected. So if it's unexpected, and I do this in my parenting also, is this unexpected reward can be motivating. An expected reward or a contingent reward can be demotivating in the long term, even if it appears to be motivating in the short term. But that's not really what I'm talking about, so I'll go on. So yes, scores and grades, that's something else, are motivating. For some students, that is correct. For some students want to be the top of the class and they want to know where they are in relation to other people. But generally speaking, nowadays, I try and avoid as much as possible giving scores and grades. So at Key Stage 3, so year 7, 8, 9, I do not give them scores. I will even mark a test that they have done, maybe an end of unit test, and I will give it back with no number on it. If they really wanted to add up the ticks, you know, I do put numbers, I do put some numbers in my mark scheme, but I really try and avoid as much as possible. And if students at GCSE ask me, what grade is this? I will avoid asking, I really dodge that question until maybe year 11 when we are expected as teachers to have really strong predictions and discuss it with students. So that's my personal take on things based on some research that I've done, academic reading that I've done. And then I would also challenge this, is learning vocab the most important part of getting a high exam grade? Because we do know in all languages, vocab is really important, for sure. And in Chinese, the added challenge is they've got to learn the character as well as the sound. So there's no denying that we do need to spend a big chunk of our lesson time and our perhaps homework time, our learning in general on that. However, I'm finding at the moment with year 11, with some weaker students, that just learning vocab is not actually going to help them. In the writing test, they are not going to get a good score if they write a list of nouns or, you know, some verbs. It's going to be more about the sentence structures. It's going to be more about being able to give their opinion and justifying their opinion. So that's what I'm finding in year 11, particularly I'm thinking of the writing score. With the reading, with the listening, again, we need to train them to be able to know some vocab and pick out vocab, but I'm not fully convinced that it's worth spending all of our time on that. So that's maybe me being a bit, trying to be a bit controversial. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is how we could do it differently. I'm giving you two alternatives. And what I call the traditional approach is genuinely what I used to do 12 months ago. So I have been traditional in my approach for 16, 17 years. And then it's only quite recently I'm doing things differently as a result of some research I've done. So my traditional way might be I set a list of words for homework. We could do this as I just give them a piece of paper of a list of words. We could give them a Quizlet link and assume that they will find Quizlet interesting or useful. Not all students do. And then I'm going to tell them a due date. And on that due date, there will be a test in class. Again, I can do some listening. I can read out some words. I could show them some characters. So it's partly listening and reading usually. I could even ask them to write characters, but I would rarely ask them to write as many characters as I expect them to recognize in listening and reading. And then also traditionally, we would have some sort of pass mark. So if the test was out of 20, the pass mark would traditionally be about 50%, which I always felt really uncomfortable with. Because if I'm saying 50% is okay, well, it's not really. It's not okay to have 50%. That's 50% that you don't know. So I struggled with that, and my department would trying to do things consistently, and I never agreed with that one anyway. And then we'd have to link this with some sort of consequence because it's homework, right? So if they don't do their homework, they should expect a detention. And then I would have a handful of students in the detention, which would be a resit, so they'd have to do the test again. And they're terribly grumpy. They're arguing constantly. I did do my homework, okay? And it's just really, really unpleasant for all of us. So more recently, in the last 12 months, I've been trying to do things differently. So that's why I wanted to put my hand up to speak today. being aware that I need to speed up probably. So essentially this is the same, but I am doing things in a slightly different way. So instead of setting a Quizlet link for homework now, I now do two things. I do set that Quizlet link because I have the Quizlets all set up, but I also turn that Quizlet into some games. And my preferred way of doing this is using wordwall.net. I do not work for them. I do pay them every month, but it's rather cheap. It's actually costs me £2 a month, and I can use it for all of the different languages I teach. I won't be able to model today how to do that, but I have got a slide on that. And it's really, really easy. So if you've got a Quizlet link already, you just export the words and literally copy and paste Control V into Wordwall. So Wordwall offers two languages, if you like. So I usually have the characters on one side. On the other side, I have both the Pinyin and the English together. So you could take off the English. You could have a different set if you really wanted to take away the character and focus on the Pinyin. You could take away the character. And then the wonderful thing about Wordwall really is that at a click of a button, once I've imported my words, I can make many versions of the games, and there's quite a few nice backgrounds as well. So I'll show you an example in a minute. So this is one example. If you're able, I will post that in the chat if you want. If you're able to scan it, you can do it you can scan that and have a look at what it looks like. There are other websites. So another one, my colleagues really, really love Blukit. I like it less than them because there's a lot of, this is kind of like, there's versions of the game. So there's sort of treasure chest options. I think there's a lot of not learning that goes into Blukit as well as the learning, but students love it. And then I also pay for a website called Purple Culture, and it has an interactive quiz maker on there. So the way that I prefer Purple Culture is because you can actually choose from quite a lot of different options of tests. And my favorite at the moment is the audio going to multiple choice. And you can share that in a QR code. So this is what I would do instead of setting a list of homework. I'll let you play around on that if you want while I'm talking. Obviously that's not allowed in my classroom, but you are allowed to, you are adults. So I would set this game alongside the Quizlet link. I would challenge students to play on the game for about 10-15 minutes, by which point they might have actually completed the game twice if they're quite quick. And then I would say, all you have to do is put your name on the leaderboard. I don't care where you are on the leaderboard. I'm not going to reward the top 10, but I can have up to 50 names on my leaderboard. So I just want them to put their first name and their initial onto the leaderboard. And then that's my check of homework. So I can either do that before the next class, before the due date, or I can check it in the class. Sometimes I forget to check these things. So I'm doing the register and I just have the leaderboard and I just say, call out and tell me which number you are on the leaderboard. And I just display the leaderboard for everyone. But I don't reward the top ones. It doesn't really matter. Some of them get on the leaderboard multiple times. So that's just them showing me that they have participated in learning the words. So it's just about participation. That's not them showing me whether they now know the words, either in their short-term or long-term memory. But then I would also start my lessons always with a retrieval task. Retrieval tasks in my school, we have this 80-20 rule where 80% of the retrieval task is supposed to be about content from recent lessons, say in the last couple of weeks, whereas 20% of the retrieval task is supposed to be from previous, I don't know, terms or years. So that's a rule in my school, and that comes from science-backed methods as well about retrieval. So 80-20. So if I had an exercise with 10 questions, 2 of them would be related to content that's further away. Okay, as an alternative, because I'm aware time is going quickly, as an alternative to playing games for homework, I like to give students choice. So choice is similar to autonomy, is very motivating. And I train students in different ways of learning vocab. So it may take a few lessons for me to train students either in year 7 or maybe at the start of every year. And they find themselves being drawn to different options. So you'll know what I mean. If you've got a student that loves drawing, you've got a student that loves, you know, the online games, you've got a student that's confident and loves teaching people, that's also one of the options. So at the moment, these are my 5 kind of go-to options. you have to give them a little bit more information of this. You have to really lay out the steps of first you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this for each of the options. But then my homework setting becomes very easy, because I can just copy and paste these options. These are your 5 options. This is your list of words, and you need to show me by the due date some evidence. So this is a different way of doing it rather than playing games online. Students need to show me some evidence, but all of them are going to have different types of evidence, and that's me recognizing that they're all different. And sometimes if they've got something different from their partner, that's really nice in the beginning of the next question. So you can say, show your partner the evidence. It's not just about show me, show your partner the evidence. Show your partner how you've deconstructed the characters. We use a website called characterpop.com to do that, but there are quite a lot of different websites. And then the character pop kind of explodes the character into different chunks. I try and use chunks rather than radicals, because it's not actually the same thing. And then they have to kind of present this in a way that's attractive in their book. So they might do that with a list of 10 words or something. If they teach somebody else, like a parent or sibling, that parent or sibling has to write a little note about how they found it. And sometimes I get them to actually prepare something to teach the class the next lesson. And some students love doing that, some students don't. So I don't force any of these methods on them. Some of them like the writing out repetitively, some of them don't. So I don't force them into any particular method. So yeah, I can't at the minute see the chat, but I will invite anybody to please disagree with me or agree with me in the chat. This slide just goes through step by step how to do it from going from Quizlet to Wordwall, because it was really very, very quick. And once I realized how powerful this is and how many different Wordwall games you can play, I think you can make 5 Wordwall games for free. I really quickly realized how powerful this is. And when you publish the link, you can also publish a QR code, which is great for in-class, because unlike Michelle, my students are allowed to use their phones in class, you know, when instructed to by a teacher. So yeah, so that is the end of my presentation. And if there is time for any interaction in the chat, I'm going to click on the chat now. Now I'm reading the chat backwards, which is unusual. And I'm still sharing my screen, aren't I? Sorry, let me unshare my screen. So awesome. Richard asks, £2 a month, do I pay that personally? Oh, do you know what? I do, but I don't recommend that. It's just because I'm really lazy. My finance department's a little bit slow, but they would pay for it.
This is an issue. This is really interesting. So to scale newbie Chinese to the world, right, we need to figure out how to actually get money from people, right? So schools are really bureaucratic and really slow to leverage that up. And we're just wondering, is there a price we could go in at for a teacher to buy it with their own money, just so it's faster, and then we can get it through to the students, so the parents are buying it themselves. So we're trying to no unless
it's £2 a month. Clearly £2 a month for me personally is the moment at which I cannot be bothered to do the forms required for finance.
Okay, so that's great to know.
That's clearly effective for me.
Yeah.
And almost every month my husband goes, what is Wordwall, when he looks at me. And I just say, it's just a thing that's changed my life. Don't question me, please. So yeah, don't do that.
Okay, really interesting talk. Thank you so much. The whole getting the student to teach someone else, and then it's like the social sharing of their learning. That's really nice.
So this is also, linked to the relatedness in the project that I'm doing with a particular class. The relatedness is important. So changing up the groupings and sharing personal information from me to them and from them to me that's kind of part of it. And having some choice and some control over their learning.
Yeah.
The autonomy, really.
And just, sorry if I can steal more time, definitely I'm fascinated to hear more about this reward. We've run into some issues where, people who expect rewards kind of can switch off, and it becomes a burden rather than anything else. It's kind of dragging everyone back. But then others of our rewards take people by surprise, and then there's a gasp and a, oh! And so, this is fascinating. I'd definitely love to hear more. So I'm going to hook up with you after by email, and maybe you could point me to some of those resources. That was fascinating.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a project I'm writing up at the moment, but it builds on a project I did last year where I measured all of the students studying Chinese in my school, which was almost about 170 students, and measured the type of motivation they had. And it's on a continuum between intrinsic and extrinsic. And as you might, it didn't surprise me to learn that the year sevens and the beginner learners, where there was lots of novelty and lots of curiosity about Chinese characters and lots of passion, they had the most intrinsic motivation. And then the students towards the exam, year 11, year 13, had the most extrinsic. So that wasn't surprising in itself. But what also was really interesting and illuminating was the qualitative research, the data collection that went along with that. So there's semi-structured interviews and what students were coming out and saying. And I found it's kind of something for a different conference or a different day, but the way that the schools structure who Mandarin is available to and how students elect to do it is so important for motivation. And so I ended up calling my whole paper last year, "My dad thinks it would look good on my CV," because that is the single most comment that came up most. And I know that would resonate with other teachers as well. So that's what it ended. So that's what my project was about, intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. And my follow-up project is about, as I said, the autonomy, competence, relatedness, and its effect on motivation. So I'm using a much smaller group. And I'm just doing as many different things as I can think of to enhance those aspects in the students. So again, this may not get published. It probably won't get published outside of my institution. But yeah, you never know.
And if I can see more time, just Michelle commented, lots of students come to the board to share ideas on how to remember characters regularly, and they love it. And that's absolutely our experience. What we found is students start teaching each other or started immediately teaching the entire group, and then they almost become embarrassed because they realize they're the center of attention, and it's fascinating to watch. So thank you so much.
And thank you, Michelle, for your relay race idea from the conference, because I've used that and I've used it in my teaching trainer, and I did cite you, so thanks. Your low tech ideas are totally relevant also for this.
Brilliant.
Sorry, thanks, Paul.
And my thanks as well, Lucy. It's really fascinating hearing about reward. It's something I'm learning about at university as well, in a primary context, and it's often not what you expect. Very different from how teaching is often done. So yeah, really fascinating to hear that, and the different approaches for giving student choice, which was great. Thank you very much. Yeah, it was brilliant. Would anyone else, I'm conscious we're over time now, but is anyone thinking, I really want to share something before we go? Any sort of, you're very itchy to sort of share, otherwise we'll bring it to a close, but please raise your hand if you would just love to give a final comment. Okay, well, if not, can I just close by saying a huge thank you to all our contributors, to Lucy, Richard, and Sam. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. It's great to come together and to share different ideas, how we can accelerate Mandarin learning in the UK and beyond, to really try and upscale it so it's becoming a global language is the dream. It would be brilliant if we could come together again and share ideas, share progress, maybe in 6 months' time, something like that, have new contributors and keep this conversation going on. But thank you so much for your time this morning. I've really enjoyed it. It's been really interesting. I wish you all the best in your individual pursuits, wherever you are. But thank you very much. Have a great remainder of your weekend. This presentation will be shared on JISC and via YouTube. If you want to contact Richard, his email is richard@newbiechinese.com. If you any additional conversation that you want to have with him, please email him directly. Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, Paul. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Cheers.